It is a beautiful day to be alive, and I am so glad we have this time together. I'm Sanaa Laybourne. I am a professor, scholar, connector, and avid reader. I've always loved learning about what's happening in our social world and sharing that knowledge, especially over a good cup of coffee. And so here we are. Each week on Let's Grab Coffee, I catch up with experts from across the country who are investigating our most pressing social issues and common curiosities. Over the next hour, you'll learn about their inspirations, motivations, and of course, what they know about the world around us. Go ahead and grab that cup of coffee and get ready for an engaging and insightful conversation. Coffee is a $450 billion global industry that originated in Ethiopia, yet some statistics show that less than 1% of revenue goes towards African countries. Here in the United States, coffee is commonly associated with Starbucks, those sugary blended beverages, or perhaps a daily pick-me-up taken on the go, or even enjoyed in a fancy specialty coffee shop, often located in a gentrified neighborhood. However, coffee has a deeply Black and deeply communal history. What would it mean to understand coffee's Black history and its Black future? Coffee Black is on a mission to find out. Today, I'm joined by Bartholomew Jones, a Memphis-born entrepreneur who in late 2018 co-founded Cxffeeblack, a Black social enterprise alongside his wife, Renata Henderson, Memphis's first Black female coffee roaster. Welcome, Bart. I am so excited to have you here with us today.
Yeah, what it do, family? How y'all living?
Hey, I am feeling so good. I am so glad that we are having this opportunity to chat about one of my favorite things, coffee, but also about community. And I just have to start straight out the gate. Tell me about your coffee today.
So today I'm sipping on a Fuji, which is a region in Rwanda. It's from a roaster called Rabbit Hole Roasters out of Canada that we're collaborating with to
Mm.
raise money for the Black Barista Exchange Program. It's giving me like pie crust and blackberries and maybe like some sweet grapes. It's really vibey. Yeah, that's what I've been sipping on today.
I love it. I love it. And how much coffee have you had today? I think that's another important
Mm.
question.
I brewed a 15-gram brew earlier and an 18-gram brew, which roughly is about 600 grams of coffee. So I don't know how that calculates. I do my coffee in grams, the way it on the scale. So I don't know how that. Maybe 2 cups, 3 cups. I don't know. I don't really do
Okay.
cups. You know what I mean? We gotta hit it with the metrics.
All right, metrics. All right, you mentioned the Black Barista Coffee Exchange. Tell us a
Yes.
little bit about that.
So the Black Barista Exchange Program is the first of its kind program to try to unite people of African descent through coffee. And so we're taking a cohort of 4 African American baristas to Ethiopia, Rwanda, and possibly Kenya to learn about pre-colonial coffee culture there. And then we're raising funds to bring another cohort of 4 African baristas back over here to the States to see the other side of the supply chain and to imagine the future of coffee for African descended people together.
I love that. I
Yeah.
love that idea of imagining the future of coffee for folks throughout the African diaspora. But before we get to the future, I want to start with the origins
Mm-hmm.
because I'm going to guess that a lot of people haven't given too much thought to that cup of coffee that they might have every day and its rich history. So I'm wondering if you could kind of educate us a little bit on coffee's origins.
Yeah, for sure. I think coffee is one of those things where a lot of people don't really think about where it comes from. I think that's kind of a byproduct of capitalism in a lot of
Mhm.
ways that we don't think about the origin of the things we consume. We just consume them. The MLK actually has a quote that says, "We do not finish breakfast without being dependent on more than half the world. At the table, we drink coffee that is provided for us by a South American or tea by someone from China or cocoa from somebody from West Africa. Before we leave our jobs, we're beholden to more than half the world."
Mm.
That quote has always stuck with me, especially as a Memphian. You grow up going to the Lorraine Hotel Motel and going to the Civil Rights Museum. And I don't know if people noticed, but there's actually like a coffee shop sign on the side of the motel. And my imagination would always run once I learned about the African origins of coffee, if MLK was able to know that, like how that quote might have changed and how he might have connected the coffee he was drinking at that hotel to the legacy of slavery he was trying to affect in Memphis. And, the connection was never made. But in a lot of ways, the idea, the hope, the dream, if you will, of that was the origin of Coffee Black. Like, what if we were aware of these connections? What if we had a chance to really inspire and put our efforts into creating a connection here and creating opportunities from that connection? And that's where the Genesis coffee was discovered, in 850 BC. Caffea arabica, to be specific. It really should be called Caffea ethiopica, but we talk about that later. But yeah, that species of coffee, there are 130 different species that we've discovered at this point. All of them are indigenous to Africa, but that species is probably the most popular species in the world. It's what most people consume. We've probably seen 100% Arabica on like hotel coffee bags. And that's just letting you know that is connected to that first documented species that was discovered in Ethiopia. And there's so many beautiful, rich traditions all over the country and in Sudan as well. But for us, man, the most people's connection to coffee is not from that indigenous Black African perspective. It comes from coffee by way of the colonizers who capitalized on it, right? And so that puts us fast forward to 1616 in the port of Mocha in the country of Yemen with the Dutch, who are trying to build their East Indian Trading Co. And they're looking to add coffee to the cadre of other cash crops that they're exploiting. And that you see even in a lot of our language represents that, right? Like if you've heard coffee talked about as Java, right? That's because the Dutch people colonized the melanated people of Indonesia, specifically the island of Java. And that was where their coffee plantations were located, right? And even the language, right? Plantations. Most of us don't associate coffee as a crop that's grown on plantations, but it's heavily tied to slavery at its colonial root. And so that becomes really profitable for the Dutch. The Dutch share it with the rest of the colonizing cartel, as I like to call them. And you get the Spanish and the Portuguese and the English and the French and everybody else in on it. And as they divide up the world and, scramble for Africa and raid the Caribbean and Central and South America, coffee becomes one of those cash crops, one of those very profitable cash crops that is added alongside of sugarcane and, tobacco and cotton and some of the more familiar ones. And a big driver of that particular crop of coffee was the African slaves that they stole to grow it. And we know historically, this has been brought out in documentaries like High on the Hog and things like that. But we're dispelling the myth now that slaves were unskilled labor, right? Like these slaves were being taken specifically for their agricultural knowledge, right? And their ability to be able to bear that type of labor in their bodies accurately enough to produce a crop that was, viable in the market. And so my suspicion is that coffee was not much different, right? Like that, knowing that coffee has its origins in the African continent, that there was a desire there to bring African descendants to grow this crop because there's some type of ancestral knowledge. I don't have documented evidence of that, but there is at least clear evidence that these slaves, as far as rice and other things were concerned, were being taken for their knowledge to grow these crops. And I wouldn't imagine that coffee would be much different. But we do see, like in Haiti, for instance, in Brazil, for instance, in Jamaica, for instance, where Black slaves become the primary workforce for these coffee plantations. And Brazil in particular is pretty much singularly responsible for coffee's current role in the marketplace as this ever-present, very cheap, very available drug or stimulant. And the labor of these slaves is what made coffee become so affordable and what made it become attached to what we consider now to be like a cheap drink or a cheap beverage. And that's because the labor of the people who were growing it was not considered in the cost at its export or import. And so right now, that's a big part of the problem where we are now. But that history is present, and we even see it today with gentrification, where you can't get away from this legacy of anti-Blackness built into the world's most popular Black beverage.
Wow. Okay. There was so much there that we have to dig into.
Yeah.
I mean, Oh, when we think about, I love how you ended just, what you shared so far, thinking about the anti-Blackness that is embedded in this figurative and literal Black beverage that many of us start our day with, end our day with, and yet to be completely ignorant of that history. And I would say that is by design, right? That we don't know the histories of coffee, of its origins, and even how it came to be so popular and mass distributed around the globe. And to
Mhm.
your point, what changes when we think about these histories, right? How does that change how we think about coffee? How does that change how we consume coffee? And then how does that change what we think about our future in this beverage? And especially thinking about a lot of the ways that climate change is also potentially impacting coffee production as
Yeah.
well. And so I think these are a lot of questions that really come to light for me. And also, something you mentioned about this word Java. I'm thinking a lot about language these days and how sometimes we are perpetuating histories of exploitation through the words that we use because we don't understand their origins. And so
Yeah.
even hearing you talk about Java, for me, I'm like, wow, like being just more conscious of that and thinking about what
Mhm.
does that mean to be actively, perpetuating a system that has exploited Black people.
It's serious. And I think that it's so subliminal and sinister that
Hmm.
oftentimes, we end up, as you said, participating in these histories without our knowledge of it. And I think that, for those of you who are listening and kind of reconsidering why I didn't think my morning cup of coffee had all these things, I don't think we're responsible for the histories that we're born into. I think we're responsible for what we do about it. And so
Hmm.
once we become aware, now the question is what's next, and I think that's what we focus on here is like that's why the piece about Afrofuturism, what's the future, what happens? Because if you simply if all we're doing is mourning about these histories, I think we end up with a sense of, enemy, to use a sociological term, or like hopelessness. I think about when my wife's uncle passed away, and just in the creator's timing, it happened within the same week that my youngest son was born, and how like there's these cycles of life and
Hmm.
cycles of death. And I think if we kind of remove ourselves from participating in these things, it oftentimes leaves us losing a bit of what makes us human. And I think within the social justice space, there is a almost hyperfixation on identifying injustice without imagining justice. You know what I mean? Like,
Hmm.
it can lead to burnout in a lot of ways. And so for us, I think while it's important to acknowledge the past, coffee is a seed at the end of the day, and seeds are about bringing forth new life. It's about acknowledging the history, reconciling with the history, but it's also about using that to sprout roots for new life. And that's, I think, a big lesson I learned from the indigenous people in Africa, specifically in the Gucci zone of Ethiopia, that has kind of centered and grounded our work here in Memphis.
Hmm. I love what you said that yes, we should learn these histories, and once we are aware of them, then the next question becomes, what are we going to do? I love how you put it. We're not responsible for the histories we're born into, but we are responsible for what we do, moving forward with Coffee Black. Again, that is your way of saying, okay, I know these histories. What am I going to do? And how am I going to imagine a future and to really imagine, right? To not be
Yeah.
constrained with what has been or what is current, but actually to imagine the future that you would like to see. And I know part of that really for you was also taking this trip to Africa
Mhm.
to really connect with other producers, other coffee farmers, but also to go back to a homeland in a way. And I'm wondering if you could share with us a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, for sure. We honestly, again, kind of being grounded in community, grounded in these like indigenous traditions that I think our community still holds. There's just this tradition of incarnation that I think is really important, and like communal collective responsibility that's always been put into me as a kid. Like, you are not just responsible for yourself, you're a product of all the people who came before you and here who are here with you. And the perceptions and the realities of those people are in many ways like incumbent upon you to react to and respond to and be in dialogue with. And so when we started the company, probably the height of the pandemic, we kind of pushed back on a lot of people telling us to start a coffee shop. And I'm gonna land the plane, but I kind of have to start before. My dad's a preacher, I can't help it. So yeah, I think we start in this space where we vehemently don't want to have a coffee shop. We're in the community. My wife and I at this point have been 3-4 years moved into a neighborhood here in Mitchell Heights where we're like, okay, we're mentoring. We're, background on addressing Black flight in communities. Like, man, what does it mean to avoid the brain? My kids are home, to avoid the brain drain that happens in Black communities after segregation. And so we're here, we're working, we're mentoring, we're going to church in the community. And, I'm talking to my neighbors. They don't have jobs. I'm talking to the community development organization in the neighborhood, which is the Heights CDC. They're trying to address blight. They got this building they used to burn down. And they're just, the CEO, Jared, is constantly hitting me like, yo, man, y'all got to start a coffee shop. I'm going on this long diatribe about how coffee shops gentrify neighborhoods. It's one of the 4 horsemen of the gentrification apocalypse alongside craft breweries and Whole Foods and small ladies walking smaller dogs. It's like, yo, we don't want to do that, bro. So you're going to bring a bunch of, and just the business model is built on commuter traffic. And so like most coffee shops are built on people driving there, not walking there, right? And so I'm literally throwing up the bat signal, like come in my neighborhood. And when I do that as a business owner, I'm going to be forced to prioritize the needs of my customers. And if my customers are people who don't live here, then I'm decentering my community's needs just as a side effect of that. And so I was like, I don't want to do that. We get to a point where they're like, look, I don't care. We'll do flexible rent. Like you can give coffee away for free. We have this space. We want to see it being used in the community. So we're like, well, it's not a coffee shop. It's like an anti-gentrification coffee club. It's a coffee club. We just kicking it. You know what I mean? And that became like the headquarters for a lot of what we've done. And it was the genesis of the trip to Africa. So I took a month and just worked there, right? I was like, I want to be here. Yeah, we're going to hire baristas or we'll train my neighbors to be baristas, but I want to take a month. I'm getting off social media. I'm just going to be here. I'll be present. I'll be physical. I'll be incarnated. And I would tell this story all the time, similar to the way I've told it to you. And my neighbors would consistently ask me like, wow, that's amazing. Like, how do they feel about us drinking their coffee? And I'm like, my guy, I ain't been like, I'm talking to people on the internet. We on WhatsApp. Like, I'm not over there. Like, bro, you gotta go. And I'm like, yo, you don't understand how hard it is to leave the country. I'm a Black American. I've never even filed for a passport before. I have no idea what this experience. Like, my family has been in the United States since we got here on the first boat, right? So I haven't. This is all this trauma even behind leaving and going over the Atlantic Ocean and kind of retracing this journey in an opposite way. And they just wouldn't let me. They was like, nah, that's not gonna work, fam. Like, we gonna keep asking you. And they kept asking me to the point where I was like, maybe I'm thinking about this wrong. Like, maybe my imagination isn't big enough. And I think rooted in what we do is like this idea of a co-generative dialogue, which is like an idea that I learned in my educational classes, get my master's degree about. It's by this dude named Paulo Freire, who worked with indigenous and campesino workers in Central and South America who are adult English language learners. And it's like a different approach on what does it mean to make knowledge or to name things, right? How do we determine what reality is? And he's arguing that in a lot of ways that should be communal, and it is for people of color. And so I was like, man, if I'm going to be true to this idea here, I need to consider this notion, something that to me was impossible, but my community is telling me it is possible. Yeah. And that led us to launch a GoFundMe. After speaking with a lot of my mentors, they were like, yeah, bro, do it. I did it. In 72 hours, we had $24,000. It's kind of crazy. So it led us to launching this trip to Africa, shooting a documentary, building an all-Black supply chain from Ethiopia, which is the only uncolonized Black country in the world, to Memphis, Tennessee, which is currently, based on recent statistics, the Blackest city in America per capita. And it's just created this crazy experience, man. But it was something that I think was like one of those pivot moments for me where I was like, as I'm over there and we can get more into the journey itself if you want to, but like, I'm just, I'm being so, I'm getting emotional thinking about it just because there's so, prior to going to Africa, everything I was doing in coffee at the end of the day was a hypothesis. It was like a what if. It was I'm connecting dots that people aren't connecting. I'm making an argument that hasn't really been made in the industry and definitely not in culture as a whole. And I'm getting a lot of flack for it. You know, I'm getting a lot of support, but you know, you get a lot of gaslighting from white supremacists. You get a lot of like trolls on social media, a lot of hate emails, and you know, people just being like, you're doing too much. Like, it just doesn't have to be about race. And it was so crazy going there and seeing how we were received. These people like, you're the first African American we've ever met. Where y'all been? You know what I mean? And I'm explaining like, this is where we been. And they were like, well, this is where we've been. And it's time to connect, and it's time to build together. It's time to reclaim our pride and our dignity and our products and our heritage and our traditional crops. Like, and being told this by indigenous people who like look like my aunties and uncles, that we're eating food that is like indigenous to what I grew up eating in the South in America, and seeing how this is connected to, you know, countries that are, you know, thousands of miles away from the country where my ancestors was taken from, and definitely thousands and thousands of miles away from my grandma's house in Alabama, you know, and seeing like we're communing over these same foods, and like how coffee is so embedded in their culture, to their spiritual beliefs, to their like societal ties, and imagining now like, what would it, man, we missed so much, you know. And I didn't know how, I knew we were missing something, but when you realize how much you're missing and the real value and weight of it, and the fact that those people have been waiting on you to come back for this long and reclaim that, it just was, I mean, it was life-changing for me.
Yeah, I mean, even just listening to you talk, like I'm getting chills because I deeply understand this idea of connection, you know, across time and space, and also about returning to a homeland, or what maybe is a homeland. You're not sure, right? Like, you know, and that idea of, you know, what's possible. You know, as I was listening to you share with us kind of your journey, and thank you so much for that. You know, what struck me was these moments of internal resistance that you had, and where you said, like, you know, to you, some of these things were impossible or not possible in the current way we might think of a coffee shop, for example. Or it was outside of your, you know, realm of imagination to go back to Africa. But that community piece, that's the other piece that continues to pop up in your story, is how you have your community in a lot of different shapes, forms, and fashion saying, like, we see this for you, we support you in it, and not just in idea, but in practice, right? And so, as you mentioned, you know, you have this GoFundMe, and then within 72 hours, you know, it's funded, right? And so again, it is that tangible community support that's saying, like, we got you. Like, this is not just for you, it's also for us, and for this vision that you have, that we believe in, and bringing this into material reality, like you mentioned, having this all Black supply chain, right? And the importance of that to the mission of reclaiming something that has always been yours. I think about birthright a lot, you know, and coffee as a birthright for you and for Black people, and for, you know, bringing that awareness to Black folks in particular, but non-Black folks as well, so that we understand these histories. But then for you to physically be able to go to Africa to make connections in Ethiopia, and to feel it in a much different way than just the intellectual knowing of something, but now that embodied practice. And that's what I hear a lot in your story as well.
Yeah, and I think it just is always a constant reminder. Even my wife, the first time she went with us was on the screening tour where we're showing this documentary to African community. I mean, it was a worldwide tour, so we went all over the United States. We went to Ethiopia, we went to Rwanda, showing this documentary. And I remember in Rwanda, after seeing the documentary, you know, they're just asking questions like, "What does the X mean?" You know, the name, and I'm talking about, it's this this stolen heritage, this missing link, right? This missing variable that I think is something that we need to figure out. You know, what is the sum of our parts, right? We're missing this part of the equation and trying to reclaim that. And she's explaining how we don't know as African Americans our ancestral languages. We don't know, you know, our heritage, the communities that we come from, the ethnic traditions, and you know, people were blown away because within the coffee community in Rwanda, that had not been a point of conversation. And they connected it to their experience in the genocide, right? And like how much of what happened in the genocide was the result of missing identities or misplaced identities. I heard a pastor online, he called them lie identities. And these false narratives that were given about who we are and what we're supposed to be, and that led to the genocide, right? Was these identities given by the colonizers, and how in healing for them, they were like, man, it was us sitting back and saying, let's go back and remember, right? Remember in the sense of like actually repopulating, right? Remember, like repopulating our ancestral line back to the point that exists before we were given this lie identity, if you will. And for them, that was the key to then say, well, where we, if it's the great, however far we got to go back to like, this is who we were before we were given this false narrative. That's what we're going to then project forward as the basis for who we will become. And for them, they told my wife, they were like, I want you to go back as far as you can. And then whenever you can't go back anymore, insert my grandfather, insert my grandmother, insert my heritage, which for this young lady who was telling my wife, literally her heritage goes back to like one of the first Rwandan kings, right? Wow. And so they gave my wife a name, which means it was Uwachu, which is actually the name of our first Rwandan roast we released. But it means our own. And so they were literally claiming her. And in my faith tradition, this idea of being grafted in to a branch, right? Grafted into a line is so crucial for us. And so physically embodying that experience with people, I mean, everybody was crying. You know what I mean? Like everybody was like just tears. We starting up.
Look, and, I'm about to cry right now. I could only imagine being there.
It was crazy. And that is the experience that people of African descent don't get to experience in coffee. And I think people globally, that conversation is not the conversation that's had with coffee, right? About it being a cultural heritage. And we found that across cultures, everybody in some way can connect to this feeling of like being disconnected. And that for all of us, coffee as a seed can be a way to reconnect us to our roots. And that starts by honoring and identifying the indigenous African people who discovered it. But in many ways, like as Africa and much more specifically Ethiopia is the origin for coffee, right? Like Africa is ground zero for human life, right? And I think many of our cultures have these things that are indigenous that we've lost as the world has become more globalized and as capitalism has become kind of the primary means by which we interact with each other. And coffee has the potential to restore a lot of the generational thinking that's missing globally if we let it, you know, if we're willing to acknowledge the wisdom of these indigenous African people who discovered it, and also the current realities of the neo-indigenous, if you will. That's a term Chris Emden, who's like a author I used to read a lot as an educator and still love his work. But the neo-indigenous, and even in Western communities, like people of color have continued these traditions, right? We think about hip hop as a continuation of the tradition of the griot in West Africa. And these traditions also have much to teach us about what coffee can mean today. So that's what we're excited about. And that's kind of what inspires us now. Like, man, these are the futures we want to start bringing into the present.
I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you see your role in kind of continuing some of this cultural heritage, some of these practices here in Memphis specifically. You've hinted at it a little bit, but I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think a big part of it is synthesizing. We're synthesizing traditions that we feel are, you know, analogous or symmetrical or have a certain amount of synergy. So, for instance, one thing we kind of spent time observing and participating in the Ethiopian coffee ceremony, more specifically, being able to learn about, and this is one of the things I want to learn more about when we November with the Black Barista Exchange Program. But the Bunakala ceremony, which is indigenous to the Oromo Guji people, is technically the world's first bulletproof coffee. But there is a kind of a wisdom or a notion of value, a moral value within this thing that has been synthesized into a blessing. And the blessing is Bunafi Nagea Hindabina, and it means may your house lack no coffee nor peace. And I can explain, to my knowledge, how that blessing came about. But there's this idea that where there is coffee, there is peace, right? Mm-hmm. May your house lack no coffee nor peace. That you should, as the coffee flows, the peace should abound. And this is a blessing that's given to every person the first time you drink coffee. And communally, it's almost like Occam's razor. That is a way to measure whether or not coffee is being done right. If there is peace. If there is not peace, the coffee's not right. And again, going back to my faith tradition, growing up, like when they would give communion, you couldn't take communion unless you were at peace with the people in the congregation. So like, if you're not at peace, you're supposed to leave and go out and reconcile and come back and partake, right? And so like, that is the notion here that like, if we're not at peace, by the time we finish this cup, we should be at peace. Like we should be in there. Even, again, these are things that I have learned about and I want to learn more about. They're like coffee houses, literally like huts that are built to go and meet with someone where you reconcile and like squash beef, and like to think about how for Black people for so long, coffee has been the antithesis of peace, right? It's been associated with everything chaotic, colonialism, slavery, hyper-capitalism, all the things, right? Then what would it look like to restore that identity? So I'm like, what traditions or rituals exist within our community now that kind of model this very circular experience, this very, cylindrical, spherical idea of like this kind of everyone being connected in a circle of peace. So I was like, circle of life vibes. What would it look like? So I was like, growing up, we used to, I'm a musician, I'm an artist, I'm an indie rapper. And like, bro, the cipher was in a lot of ways like a similar thing where everyone comes together and we literally all get on the same rhythm, the same tempo, the same beat. We align ourselves and our bodies literally to like moving in unison, in uniform, right? And then like we create together, right? So a cipher is different than a battle. Like when you battling, you're attacking each other. It's a line, it's didactic. But when you're in a cipher, right, it's communal, it's cylindrical, it's cumulative, right? Like we're all building on the next idea, which, kind of even reminds me of being in improv and like college and like you can't say no. You have to say yes and to build on it. And shout out to the improv troupe freshman year. But like I think that we've taken that, and so we do these coffee ciphers once a month, which are these kind of like coffee education classes / brewing courses / like, collective beat making sessions / like collective songwriting sessions, and it's all of these things kind of blended into one. And our goal is to attempt to kind of like create that space together and to really build on that. And it's been a really beautiful thing to do these coffee ciphers once a month because we're seeing people be able to interact with coffee from a place of pure curiosity and pure embodiment. Like I come in, I smell the coffee, I see the coffee, I'm able to just be curious, but also there's a person there who's knowledgeable enough to kind of like build with you on the knowledge instead of kind of levying. It's almost like there's this big pile of information and people push it at you and like, hey, do you know this? If you don't know this, you can't participate. You better get this if you want to do it right. But it's more so like it's a potluck. You bring me what you have. It's stone soup. I'm going to add what I have. And I know how to get us to the point where there's some knowledge. And the cipher is the same thing. Like we're producing this experience together. And you have to have a person who's responsible, right? To say like, I'm going to be the one kind of curating, but like, you can't get to that end result, much like I wouldn't have ever made it to Africa if it's not for the community's contributions. And I think that's one small example of how we tried to kind of like stack these rituals on top of each other to be able to produce a communal effect within our people. And so it's led to people feeling like coffee is for them that never felt like coffee was for them. And that's because for the most part, coffee never talked to them. It never even talked about them. It pretended like they were invisible.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that much like at the origin of coffee's industry, right, we see the invisible labor of African slaves being their labor being made invisible. Now we're making it visible, right? And what happens when you do that? Not only making it visible, but making like a viable option, right? A viable priority. It becomes almost like emblematic. It becomes a bat signal of sense, like, man, but this becomes like something that's inspiring us to think about coffee in a whole other different way. And I know I'm kind of speaking very symbolically here, but this is my best job to try to explain what happens at the coffee cipher. Because we do be rapping and we do be making coffee, but it's a deeper experience, and the experience is greater than the sum of its parts, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's community, right? Like that is having this communal experience. I appreciate you saying, making the invisible visible again, like bringing to light, coffee at its origins and its histories, but also what coffee is today, right? Because as you mentioned in the beginning of our conversation, we just enjoy, coffee or whatever other product or commodity, and all of the labor behind it is invisible, right? And for a particular reason. I love this idea of taking coffee, removing it from its current kind of what it's thought of is really like a tool for capitalism, right? A tool for our productivity, and returning it back to its origins as a communal experience, but also a healing experience. And so I love that idea of coffee as the mediator between our relationships and between making a strong foundation for our future. And that's what I heard, in you saying, like, you have these coffee huts where people come and they hash it out. They talk about it, right? We're going to get to the bottom of this. We're going to have some coffee. And now coffee is that symbol of peace and harmony.
Yeah. And it's so interesting because, like, as you're talking, it's making me think even more about some of these things that they just wrote at this point for us. But I do think it's important to bring this out. Like, they're the presumptions, right? What are the presuppositions we bring into a coffee space? The expectation that we will talk to each other is not one that is present in the West. It's the expectation, honestly, is give me my very large drink that I need for my day, and then no one should talk to me again, to the point where it's like, it's almost like a sin in a coffee space to be loud, right? Like, if we from Memphis, you know what I mean? So when we pull up to these screenings or experiences or coffee conferences, and we're coffee crawling, which is a whole thing, we pull up, and, us and our interns and the team and the producers we work with, and we coming in, we having a great time. We probably checking somebody. We pull up, ha ha ha, and then everybody turns. You know what I mean? And it's like, what you broke the cardinal rule of the shop. You can't have joy here. You know what I mean? You can't talk to each other here. And so a big part of what we're doing, what would it look like to build a space where those presuppositions were built into the space, like the indigenous presuppositions are built back in. So nobody has to tell you this is a space where you can talk. This is a space where you can loiter. Like, yes, loitering, right? Like, nobody has to tell you, just do it, right? And that's programmed into the design of the space. But a big part of it was, like, again, pulling from these spaces and traditions that we know already kind of signify these kinds of presuppositions, and then placing coffee inside of those spaces and shapes, right? So, like, our coffee shop, we're very clear, like, this is not going to be a shop where the bar is front and center and there are a lot of small tables with seats. And, like, that's not, we're going to build this out to feel like a community. The design goal was was my auntie's living room, right? And, like, it's the woke auntie who probably a little crazy at night, but you don't know about that. When she gonna take care of you when you get there, you know what I mean? And, like, she's there's the incense. This is like this emblematic picture of, like, two Black people, a couple, in an embrace from the 90s that was in every auntie's home. It's like, that's the energy we wanted to have. And then contrast that with this really high-end coffee gear, but place that behind the first, like, it's not the first thing you notice. And when you go to a coffee shop, the first thing you notice is this large Italian, steaming behemoth in front of you, making all this noise. And it's kind of like, I for a long time, we didn't even have espresso, because I was like, that's the colonizer's machine. And the community has helped me to compromise. I was being an ideologue. But, like, I'm like, man, the first thing I want you to feel is like, this, take a seat, pull up, man, this for you. I want it to feel like the barbershop, like you pull up and there's a space for us to chop and talk, like you just put up in the church or like you put up to the cookout. And we've had people be like, I don't know what it is about this space, but I feel like it's home. And we've also had people who've discounted the quality of the coffee because we chose not to engage or participate in the traditional markers of quality that exist from a design perspective in most shops, which is like the minimalism, right? And you have the Edison lights, and it's very like Swedish. And I'm not even mad at the Swedes, right? Shout out to the Norwegian. You know what I mean? They introduced us to light roast, and light roast are dope. One of my OG's propaganda always reminds me of that. So I'm not hating on that, but I'm saying like there's that works for that culture, and many people have benefited from the beauty of that culture. But what about ours? Like nobody has had a chance to like really see what coffee looks like for Black people. One, Black people haven't seen it, but then two, all the people who would benefit from it, right, haven't had a chance to experience that either. And if we look at hip hop just as an example, the world benefits a lot from Black creativity when it is allowed to flourish. And I think that that's just a truth about humanity. We all are unique seeds, and we have a fruit that the world needs to see born out because they benefit from the nutrients within that fruit, right? And I think there's the diversity we get into the ecosystem, right, in the environment, but like there are unique things that can't be replicated everywhere, right? And every unique biome kind of has a unique product to offer to humanity. And I think our collective palates are poorer because we haven't allowed for the visibility, the viable visibility of Blackness within coffee to really come to the forefront and to grow to maturity. And I think we're creating spaces where that can be seen on a micro level. And the coffee club is one of those spaces where it's like, bro, it's a yes, you can be loud. Yes, you can laugh. Yes, you can check somebody. Yes, you can be joyful. Yes, your kids can come. Yes, you can be here and like, you know what I mean? Be curious and put cream and sugar if you want and nobody bugging. But I am gonna ask you to like, hey, try it. Let me know what you think. You know what I mean? Like there's just it's a different set of presuppositions, and we're trying to make those cultural values present again in coffee.
Mm-hmm. I love that focus that on context, right? On the immediate, like actual physical context of space and place. So one, being in the United States, being in Memphis, our particular city, right? And then also the physical space of the coffee club, right? And as you were talking, I was just imagining the coffee club, right? And how the use of space, like we can conform to that space, right? So you have a certain type of seating arrangement, you have certain amenities, or you don't have certain amenities, right? In order to shape how people interact with this space. And so that in and of itself is teaching people how to interact in the space and putting people into a specific posture. Like you mentioned how folks were saying, there's just something about this. It reminds me a little bit of home or like family or, a comfortable space, right? And then we can think about comfortable for whom, for what purpose, right?
Yeah, come on.
And so that's what I was thinking about, like how that space, even for me, like I'm visualizing as I've walked into the coffee club, and it is a space where it's like, you're going to slow down a little bit. You're definitely not going to do any work there, not in the way that you would do work in a Starbucks. You know what I mean? Like it's just not built for that.
Well, we don't work, but it's a different kind of work.
It's a different type of work. Yeah. And it is that communal work, right? It is that encouragement of conversation, which I think is so rich, because how often do we miss out on those connections because we're in our little bubble of drinking our coffee and on our computer, tapping away, not doing anything important.
Literally engaging in almost like the most stereotypical capitalistic labor possible, right? And I think that that's the inspiration, one of the many inspirations we took from like watching and observing coffee, right? And this is the art of sampling, right? Like where you're paying, you got to listen closely in order to flip the sample and chop the sample. And it's like, bro, nobody's pulling up to a computer in the village with the coffee ceremony. Nobody's like, hey, y'all, I got to go send these. Everybody's stopping. They're watching these beautiful Black women roast these beautiful Black beans, and they sitting there behind down and waiting. And while you wait, what happens, right? You talk, you ask, you inquire, you bless, you pray, you laugh, you share, you cry, you sing. And even the cups, right? Like the cups in Ethiopia, these really small cups called sinis or finjals, depending on if you're speaking Amharic or Mifa. And like the tradition is you have 3 of those cups each time you sit down. Whereas, so that means if you're getting coffee, what up, Shorty? Mikey just slid through. We been talking about you. Thank you. And she brought me food. Ooh wee.
Hey.
Okay. The tradition is like, man, as you're drinking this coffee, you have 3 rounds. So it's Arbol, Tona, and then Bettercott. And those are the names of the 3 rounds. And you're doing those 3 rounds every time you have coffee. And this is a little cup. You wake up, normally first thing people want is like, let me get a venti, caramel, whatever, and you trying to keep it pushing. And it's like, nah, if you want to get caffeinated, you got to stick around, right? Yeah. And we're going to go through this process together. And then they do that 3 times a day, right? But breakfast, lunch, and dinner, essentially. So that's 9 small cups in order to get fully caffeinated. Whereas we just do one really, really big one, which is like the most American thing, the super gulp coffee, right? Supersize my coffee is wild. But like, I'm like, yo, how can we take from that? I'm probably not gonna convince people to do these small cups with me every time, but what can I do to create those touch points for the interaction? And a lot of that is the way we planned out and designed the space.
I did not know that it was 3 of those small cups 3 times a day. I knew the 3 cups, but I didn't know 3 times a day. And that just made me think like that is a different orientation to how you show up in the world, how you connect with other people, and what's important to you. That is just a different structuring of your life.
Yeah, it really is almost like a total reimagination of what is possible. And so that's why for us, when we do, like we did this piece behind me, which is called Coffee Black to the Future. And like when we created it, a big part of it was imagining the future of coffee for Black people. And so you see the clothes, like this guy's wearing this like kind of tall tee, baggy jeans, very like Memphis juking energy. But it's like this return. They're engaging in this coffee ceremony together. It's like 4 or 5 people there, and it's like, man, for me, like there's a lot of conversation about AI and what does the future look like, and I'm like, the best possible future for AI is that it allows us to slow down again, that it gives us space to return to a lot of the traditional rituals and practices that capitalism has kind of made impossible. And I'm aware of the reality that, like, with the way that what it takes to survive in America, many people can't participate in those 3 cups. And that's one of the reasons why we always have drip available for people, and we have like cold brews available, or gold brew, excuse me, available for folks. But like, we really want to create this, like, yeah, you could do that, but you're kind of missing out. Like, there's like I want you to lean in with me here and like okay, yeah, but what are y'all doing though? Like, that's the vibe of like, hey man, you can pull up. And I think that's the energy that I learned there was like, man, there's something much deeper that we're missing out on. And I think that's the best argument always. It's just like, yeah, I'm not going to argue that you have to do this, but like, why wouldn't you? It's way doper to do it this way. It's cooler to do it this way. It's swaggier to do it this way. It's a vibe. You missing the vibe all the way if you don't like. And I think that creating that almost like kind of gravity of curiosity kind of makes people, it makes people want to build culture again. And I think it makes people want to say like, okay, yeah, like this just feel way different than Starbucks. Like, yeah, I might go to Starbucks to get my work done, but when my work is done, like I want that experience. And we've had people like, they'll come in and throw their headphones on, and I see them like, oh, what they talking about over there? It's kind of crazy. They laugh. What's like, you kind of like, I'm gonna stop for a little bit and just like engage. And that's the dopest thing to me. You know what I mean? And I think, again, this is something that we found is really dope for Black people. And we found that a lot of people who aren't Black were like, yo, I missed that too. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, and that's been the craziest thing is like, I never thought I wanted to be a shop where somebody was being roasted. I mean, I did, but somebody was like, but then I see it and I'm like, dang, I feel like I'm missing an opportunity to connect to an experience that I think there's a part of our DNA that knows there's something deeper here. Like, everybody always, I mean, you think about how many churches have coffee shops, right? Like, there's something, how many times people connect coffee and community and culture. Like, I see so many times people say that, but that's just, we know there's something deeper. We just didn't have the vocabulary to explain it. And the knowledge and the wisdom and the vocabulary is held within these indigenous people who first discovered it and named it and identified it. And it just wasn't exported when the coffee was stolen. They took the product, but not the people who produced the product and their values associated with that product, you know? And I think we're just like, man, we're doing our Memphis flip on this sample. You know what I mean? This is this is I stay fly to the Ethiopian coffee. So like we flipping the sample into something that matches the tempo of our current reality, but it still holds that same essence. And I think it's a beautiful thing, fam, when that happens. Like that's a timeless experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for giving us some of that vocabulary and knowledge so that we can start to tap in to what we've always known inside, right? But to actually
Yeah.
just bring it more visible to ourselves and to those around us. Um, Please let the people know where they can find you, how they can get some of this good coffee that you all have with Coffee Black.
Yeah, tap into the subscription program. It's the best way to support, and it subsidizes the first sip program, which is what we do to let people in the neighborhood get coffee for whatever they want to pay. You know what I mean? So tap into the subscription program online, coffeeblack.com, Cxffee Black. That's X like Malcolm X. You know what I mean? Tap into us. You know what I mean? We on socials, TikTok, Instagram, all that, YouTube. And we'd love to connect with you all about what's happening. Definitely tap into the Black Barista Exchange Program. We just got a big donation from Oatly. They dropped 10 racks on the fam,
All right.
which puts us about 80% of the way there for phase one to get these Black baristas back to learn a lot of what we learned, right? This pre-colonial coffee culture. Yeah, y'all support the fam, man. Pull up. We love to see you, and feel free if you're in Memphis or close, you know what I mean? Pull up to the coffee club. It's always a vibe. Sometimes it's mellow, sometimes it's hilarious, sometimes we, you know what I mean? It's just, it is what it is. And we love to have y'all there.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today and can't wait to pull up to the coffee club and get some good coffee.
Yeah, I love it, fam. Anytime, y'all welcome to pull up.
Thanks so much to Bartholomew Jones. He, along with his wife, Renata Henderson, are the co-founders of Coffee Black, a Black social enterprise, and they have created an all-Black supply chain of coffee straight from Ethiopia to Memphis. And you have to try their coffee. One of my favorites is their Guji Mane roast. And I mean, talk about those connections. Guji from the Ethiopia region of Guji, and then think about that name, that that very common Memphis identifier, Maine. So we got the Guji Mane, and of course that nod to hip hop as well. So all of those cultural connections in one cup of coffee. I do enjoy a good cup of coffee. That's what we're here on Let's Grab Coffee. And I do take my coffee, no cream, no sugar, just coffee. What an amazing conversation. I mean, honestly, I have been following Coffee Black and the journey that both Bartholomew and his wife Renata have been on since they started Coffee Black. So it was such a pleasure to be able to chat with him today, and I'm so glad that you were able to be part of the conversation. This is Let's Grab Coffee on WYXR 91.7 FM. I'm here every Monday, and I hope you will be as well. In case you missed any part of this conversation, or maybe want to re-listen to it or share it with a friend, make sure you're subscribed to Let's Grab Coffee in podcast format. I cannot wait to be back with you again next week. But until then, I want to leave you with this reminder. Each and every day, you get to decide. Yes, you get to decide what type of day it's going to be and how you're going to show up in this world. Over time, it is those daily choices that create your life. So, what type of life are you creating?